The air on the 72nd floor of the Burj Al Noor Tower always carried a faint chill, no matter how hot Dubai was outside. Below, the Gulf shimmered in the late afternoon sun, but in here, the only heat came from the tension coiling between two sides of the table. I sat at the midpoint, as I always had in moments that could make or break years of work, close enough to catch every inflection, far enough to see the entire field. The chairman of Al Safir Holdings leaned forward, speaking in the soft cadence of Najdi Arabic, each phrase carefully balanced. I caught every nuance, shaping his meaning into English for the Vanguard executives, my voice calm, precise, invisible. Then it happened, an audible ping from the conference system, and a new email filled the center display for everyone to see. Arabic liaison to be replaced before signing. Confirm HR coordination. No one spoke. The words hung in the glass and steel silence, their weight settling instantly. I kept my tone steady as I finished my translation, but I saw the change ripple across the Saudi delegation, the tightening of shoulders, the flicker in the chairman's eyes. They knew what it meant. So did I. Lance Morgan shifted in his seat, that perpetual look of self-assurance fixed on his face. "Before we proceed," he said, rising slightly as if the room belonged to him, "there's a staffing adjustment we need to make clear." He didn't glance my way. "Nadira, your position is no longer required. HR will meet you downstairs." For a moment, the only sound was the soft hum of the air system. I felt every pair of eyes on me, American, Saudi, and otherwise. My hands remained on the table, fingers resting lightly on my notebook. I gathered my papers slowly, not because I needed time, but because silence, in moments like these, was its own kind of statement. I pushed my chair back, rose, and offered a polite nod to both delegations. The chairman's gaze held mine for a fraction longer than formality required. Then I turned and walked out, my heels clicking against the marble floor, each step measured, even. The hallway outside was lined with panoramic windows. I didn't look at the view. I didn't need to. I already knew the ground under Lance Morgan's feet had just shifted. I hadn't walked into Vanguard energy as anyone important. 12 years ago, I was a junior assistant with a second-hand briefcase and a worn Arabic-English dictionary tucked under my arm like a secret weapon. My first assignments were small pouring coffee for visiting delegations, taking notes, translating pleasantries that seemed unimportant at the time. But those unimportant exchanges became the first bricks in a bridge no one else at Vanguard could cross. It didn't take long for the stakes to rise. In Riyadh, 5 years in, I stood in a room scented with cardamom coffee and new leather, a $500 million contract hanging by a thread. Our negotiator had just compared the deal to a camel chasing the sun, a poetic image in English, but in the local dialect, it meant a fool chasing the impossible. I saw the flicker of offense in the chairman's eyes. I didn't ask permission. I stepped forward, smiled, and in Arabic said, "Better a camel chasing the sun than a merchant without shade," a proverb from his province, turning insult into respect. Shoulders eased. The contract was signed. Another time, 60 million in goods sat in port, about to be seized over a mistranslated customs regulation. One word misread had turned a lawful shipment into contraband. I caught it on a Friday night call, corrected the paperwork, and had the shipment cleared by Sunday. No one mentioned my name in the quarterly report. I learned to work in the shadows, majlis rooms in Doha, where you didn't touch the coffee cup a second time unless you were ready to end the meeting, gift exchanges in Muscat, where the wrong material or color could offend. I had restructured contracts to comply with Islamic banking laws, adjusted clauses so they honored both U.S. compliance and Gulf traditions. Every success wove another thread into that bridge between cultures delicate, precise, and essential, yet on paper. I was just an assistant director. My name appeared rarely, my role described vaguely. The credit flowed upward, to the men at the head of the table. That was fine. I used to tell myself, the bridge I had built was strong enough to stand without recognition. I just never expected someone like Lance Morgan to try and burn it down. Lance Morgan swept into Vanguard like a press release tailored Navy suits, Ivy League pedigree, and the kind of resume that made board members beam from the first meeting. It was clear he'd been brought in to modernize our international operations. In his language, that meant speed over precision, and templates over relationships. Our first clash came 3 months after he arrived. We were finalizing a joint venture in Bahrain, months of careful negotiation condensed into a 40-page contract. I was reviewing the Arabic section late one evening when I spotted a clause authorizing a financial instrument prohibited under Islamic law. It wasn't just a technical error, it was the kind of cultural breach that could have killed the deal instantly and publicly. The draft had already been sent out under Lance's signature. I stayed in the office, rewriting the section in compliance with Sharia principles, then had the corrected version dispatched as if nothing had happened. The next morning, Lance breezed into the office, humming about how smoothly Bahrain had gone. He never knew what I'd done. I told myself it didn't matter whether he knew. The deal was safe. Vanguard's reputation was safe. But a week later, walking past the half-open door of the boardroom, I heard my name. People like Nadira slow things down with cultural hand-holding, Lance was saying, his voice carrying with that effortless confidence. We don't need to babysit clients through every little local quirk. We just need signatures. I froze, one hand tightening around the folder I was carrying. My pulse thudded in my ears, but I stayed where I was, listening. A murmur of agreement followed. Papers rustled. I didn't step inside. There was nothing to gain from confronting him, not then. But I filed the moment away, sharp-edged and cold, like a shard of glass tucked into a drawer. I had learned over the years that in business, information could be more powerful than outrage. It wasn't the first time a man at Vanguard had underestimated the cost of what he dismissed. I had no doubt it wouldn't be the last. The master agreement for the Al Safir deal landed on my desk 3 weeks before the scheduled signing. It was a dense, meticulously drafted document, hundreds of pages that most executives would skim for key figures and major provisions. I read every line. Years of translating contracts had trained my eyes to catch the smallest threads that could unravel everything. That's when I found it buried deep in the operational annex. Designated liaison continuity if the named liaison is replaced prior to completion of voice print authentication. This agreement shall be rendered null and void, without recourse or renegotiation. I sat back in my chair, reading it again. The voice print sequence was more than a security step for Al Safir. It was a matter of personal trust. My name was written there in black ink. The clause was as absolute as any I'd ever seen. I didn't mark it for discussion. I didn't forward it to legal. Not because I wanted the deal to fail, God knows. 12 years of my work had gone into building the relationship that made this possible, but because I understood the weight of that trust. Remove the person holding the bridge, and the span would collapse. It was as simple as that. In the meantime, I turned to preparations that mattered to me. I'd commissioned a handcrafted inlaid wooden box from a Riyadh artisan I'd known for years. Inside, I arranged medjool dates wrapped in gold-threaded cloth, a gesture of respect and tradition. Alongside it, I wrote a speech entirely in Arabic, but not the sterile, literal form Lance preferred. I wove in regional proverbs, shared references to our history, and subtle affirmations of mutual respect. It was the kind of address that could turn a transaction into a partnership, the kind that reminded people they were remembered. When I closed the document and set it aside, my mind was calm. The bridge was still intact, for now. But I knew how fragile even the strongest span could be in careless hands. The boardroom on the 72nd floor felt colder that afternoon, though the sunlight spilling across the gulf was warm and blinding. I sat where I had always sat, between the two worlds, my speech and gift prepared. But they were no longer mine to present. Fatima stood at the head of the table, my inlaid wooden box in front of her, my carefully written pages in her trembling hands. Her voice quavered on the first sentence, and then the words began to slip. Lasting trust became delayed trust. Honored partnership warped into burdened partnership, to most in the room. The changes might have seemed small, but I saw the chairman's eyes narrow. I knew the gulf between the intended meaning and what had just been spoken. The silences that followed were longer than they should have been. When Fatima offered the gift, the chairman accepted it with a polite, distant smile. He did not open it. He did not utter the customary phrase that signaled goodwill. I felt the moment harden in the air. The bridge was splintering. Then Lance turned toward me, his expression as crisp as the crease in his suit. "Nadira," he said, gesturing toward the door. We stepped into the hallway, the door closing behind us. "This is effective immediately," he said. "HR will coordinate with you on the details. No acknowledgement, no thanks." I kept my face still. Years in this business had taught me that anger wasted energy. As I walked toward the elevators, a uniformed security officer leaned slightly toward me, in Arabic, just above a whisper. He said, "They've just bound their own hands." I met his eyes for a moment, then kept walking. The glass-walled corridor reflected the boardroom behind me, but I didn't turn to look. The sound of my heels against the marble carried me forward, away from the table, away from the speech that would now echo with the wrong words, towards something I knew had already begun. That night, Dubai was a haze of gold light and heat rising from the streets. I sat by the window of my apartment, the city laid out like a constellation of glass and steel. The steam from my cup of mint tea curled upward, carrying the scent of fresh leaves and sugar. My phone was face down on the table, silent until a faint vibration nudged it forward. I turned it over to see the secure work app glowing against the dim room. 8:47 p.m. Primary liaison removed. Protocol 9 engaged. The words were simple, clinical, but I knew their weight. Protocol 9 wasn't a minor administrative flag. It was an automatic suspension of all contract authorizations tied to the named liaison. My name. It meant no document could be finalized, no signature processed, until a new liaison was vetted, approved, and voice print verified. With Al Safir, that process would take at least a month if they were even willing to start it again. I leaned back, cradling the cup in my hands. 12 years of cultivating trust with people who valued continuity above convenience. And Lance had cut the thread in the most public way possible. The consequence wasn't revenge. It was simply the architecture of the agreement doing what it was built to do. The city hummed beyond the glass traffic threading through Sheikh Zayed Road, the faint call to prayer carrying in from a nearby mosque. I didn't make a call. I didn't write an email. There was no need to move a single piece on the board now. The next move had already been set in motion when HR deleted my name from the system. I took another sip of tea, letting the warmth fill my chest. Somewhere, a clock was ticking, not mine, not Al Safir's, but Vanguard's. And in the morning, when New York opened its eyes, they would hear it loud and clear. At 9:15 a.m., Dubai time. My phone lit up with a news alert. Al Safir Holdings withdraws from 3-buy agreement with Vanguard Energy, citing continuity breach. The language was diplomatic, but the meaning was blunt. The deal was dead. By the time I refreshed the feed, the first market reports were already coming in. Vanguard's stock had dropped 12% in the first hour of trading in New York. 40 minutes later, it slid past 14%. The sell-off wasn't cautious, it was a stampede. Then came the video. Grainy footage from someone's phone inside the Burj Al Noor boardroom. Fatima, holding my inlaid wooden gift box, stumbling over the speech I'd written. The mistranslations were clear to anyone fluent in Arabic. Lasting trust had become delayed trust. Honored partnership had warped into burdened partnership. The clip spread fast, first through a Gulf business forum, then across social media. Hashtags in Arabic translated to "Know your partners and details matter," alongside pointed commentary about cultural respect. By noon. The video had been viewed more than 500,000 times in the Middle East alone. Business reporters pounced. Headlines framed it as a case study in corporate negligence, how a company could ignore critical cultural expertise, mishandle a vital client relationship, and lose billions overnight. The commentary was brutal, each piece slicing deeper into Vanguard's image. From my apartment, I scrolled through the coverage without hurry. I'd seen this pattern before, though never on this scale, the speed at which confidence evaporated, the way markets and media worked together to strip the shine from a brand. I didn't have to speculate about what was happening in New York. The board would be in damage control mode, phones buzzing nonstop, executives locked in emergency meetings. Somewhere in those rooms, Lance Morgan's name would already be surfacing not as the man who had streamlined international operations, but as the one who had let the bridge collapse under his watch. I set my phone down and looked out over the Gulf. The tide had turned, and it wasn't stopping. By mid-afternoon Dubai time, I was getting messages from former colleagues in New York. Vanguard's headquarters was in lockdown mode. An emergency board meeting had been called. Every senior executive summoned. The boardroom was never a warm place, but I could picture the temperature dropping further as the first questions landed. The CEO was pressed on how such a fundamental clause in the Al Safir contract could have been overlooked. His answers, from what I heard, stumbled between operational restructuring and unforeseen circumstances. Then it was Lance's turn. On the wall of muted video feeds, major Gulf investors appeared from offices in Riyadh, Doha, and Abu Dhabi. Some I had worked with for years, others I knew by reputation alone. One of them, a man who had once called me at 3 a.m. to resolve a misinterpreted customs inspection, spoke first. Nadira Zaidan, he said plainly, was the relationship, not Vanguard. The words, I was told, landed like a blow. Others followed, each confirming that their trust had been built with me directly, not with the company's logo. The point was unmistakable. Removing me had not just broken protocol, it had severed the bond that made the deal possible. Lance tried to defend his decision with talk of efficiency and scalability, but the room stayed silent. One investor finally asked, "Do you even know who we trusted in that room?" There was no answer worth giving by the end of the call. The instruction was clear. Lance was to reach out to me immediately. No intermediaries. He began making calls before the meeting had even adjourned. My phone lit up with his number twice, then a third time from a New York area code I didn't recognize. I let them ring out, one after another. The sound faded into the hum of the city outside my window. I had no interest in being their quick fix. Whatever they were scrambling to repair, they were already too late. The envelope arrived by courier the next morning, heavy cream stock embossed with Al Safir's gold crest. My name was written in precise, slanted script. Inside was a single-page letter, formal and brief, inviting me to meet the chairman at their London office in 2 days' time. I flew out that evening. London was cool and gray when I landed, the air carrying the scent of rain. Al Safir's building in Mayfair was understated from the outside, but inside, it was all quiet, authority-polished wood, brass accents, thick carpets that softened every step. The chairman was waiting in a private conference room with 2 senior partners I knew well. We exchanged greetings in Arabic, the warmth in their voices genuine. Once we sat, the chairman leaned back, hands folded loosely. We were watching. He said, "Not just the deal, but how Vanguard treated you. This was a test. Nadira. We wanted to know if they valued the person who carried the relationship, or if they believed the relationship belonged to them." He paused, letting the words settle. "When they removed you, they answered our question." He outlined their offer without flourish, an exclusive consultancy role, representing Al Safir's interests in the United States. My retainer would be double my old salary, with a signing bonus wired upon agreement. More importantly, I would have full autonomy, no middlemen, no interference from executives who didn't understand the culture or the stakes. It was a recognition not just of skill, but of trust earned over years and across continents. For a moment, I thought of the Vanguard boardroom, of Lance's clipped tone, of the way my name had been erased from their system without a second thought. Here, there was no question about my place at the table. Here, the value was clear. The chairman's gaze stayed on mine as he finished. "We would like to begin immediately." I reached for the pen. The decision had already been made. The marble beneath my heels was cool, its geometric patterns catching the light from the floor-to-ceiling windows. The faint scent of sandalwood drifted through the air, mingling with the low murmur of voices gathering for the meeting. Riyadh's skyline glinted beyond the glass, but inside the Al Safir boardroom, all eyes were on me. I stood at the head of the table, leading the opening session for a 5B regional trade initiative. There were no interruptions, no second guessing, no sideways glances to someone else for approval. When I spoke, people listened. When I paused, they waited. The respect was unspoken but absolute, woven into every exchange. Halfway through the agenda, a discreet message slid across my phone's screen. Vanguard Energy had been quietly blacklisted from several Gulf consortiums, labeled high risk for cultural mismanagement. Within hours, $5 in projected contracts evaporated. The memo didn't say Lance's name, but I didn't need it to. I imagined him in a smaller office now, his view reduced to parking lots instead of city skylines. When the meeting ended, the partners lingered to discuss follow-ups, their tone easy, confident. As I stepped into the hallway, I felt the quiet satisfaction of having crossed a threshold. This was no longer about walking away from something, it was about building something new. 2 months later, in a converted loft space in New York, the first cohort of my cross-cultural training foundation gathered, funded from my Al Safir retainer. It was a program designed to teach what Vanguard had never understood, that deals aren't closed by signatures alone, but by trust, respect, and the willingness to listen. Among the attendees was a familiar face, Fatima. She sat in the second row, notebook open, her hands fidgeting in her lap. When our eyes met, she looked away quickly, but she was here. That was enough. I spoke to them about the small details that shape the largest outcomes, the moments between formalities where real partnerships are built. This wasn't about revenge, it was about ensuring the next generation wouldn't repeat the same mistakes. Sometimes, the best closure isn't slamming the door, it's building one they can finally walk through. If they're willing to learn,